August 17, 1944, northern France. Along a shell-torn country road outside Falaise, smoke still drifted from burning hedgerows when a group of weary German mechanics stumbled upon something unusual. Parked half in a ditch, canvas ripped and windshield peppered with bullet holes, sat a U.S. Army GMC 2.5-ton truck, abandoned but very much intact. Its engine was still warm. The Americans who had been driving it were nowhere in sight, likely chased off minutes earlier by one of the Luftwaffe's rare hit-and-run attacks. Curious and cautious, the mechanics of Germany's 276th Infantry Division advanced on the vehicle as though approaching a captured enemy officer. They had seized Allied trucks before, but this one seemed different, larger, tougher, built with a purpose they didn't yet understand. "Check it," one of the non-commissioned officers ordered. What began as a routine inspection quickly turned into something far more unsettling. As they studied the unfamiliar machine, a silent realization crept through the group, unease disguised as fascination. In the next hour, while examining that lone truck on a forgotten French road, these men would uncover a truth far greater than any battlefield report had revealed. Germany hadn't lost the war because its soldiers lacked courage or because its tanks weren't deadly enough. Germany was losing because of trucks. Trucks like this one, built not in secret military factories, but in American cities most of them had never heard of. This was not just a vehicle. It was a warning from Detroit, stamped in steel and shipped by the hundreds of thousands. And for the first time, these German mechanics truly understood. The war would not be decided at the front, but in the factories. The rain eased into a drizzle as the mechanics set to work, circling the truck like surgeons around a new patient. At first glance, they expected the usual frustrations that came with examining enemy equipment: strange parts, unfamiliar layout, complicated engineering. Instead, what they found stunned them. The hood opened without a struggle. No fragile fittings, no precise alignment required. Inside, the straight-six engine sat openly, every component exposed and easy to reach. Even the youngest mechanic in the group could immediately identify the carburetor, belts, and spark plugs, each one clearly labeled in English. The labels were not stamped in military codes or engineering shorthand, but in plain language. It was as if the truck had been built for someone who had never touched a wrench before. One of the Germans pried open a toolbox mounted to the running board. Inside was a complete tool kit: standard wrenches, pliers, and a maintenance manual printed on thick, high-quality paper. Inside the manual, diagrams, step-by-step drawings, no assumptions of technical knowledge, no overcomplication, just instructions any soldier could follow. "Unbelievable," one of the mechanics muttered as he flipped through the pages. "They expect men who don't know anything about engines to repair these." Another shook his head. "Not expect. They planned for it. To a German trained in the traditions of mechanical precision, this truck should have been an insult. There was nothing elegant about it. The wiring was simple, the layout was straightforward, the components looked almost crude. Yet the more they studied it, the more a strange respect grew among them. This machine hadn't been designed for elite mechanics. It had been designed for war, designed for mud, for chaos, for broken tools and frozen fingers. It was not built to impress. It was built to survive, and that made it dangerous. One of the sergeants brushed away grime from the metal chassis and squinted at a sequence of stamped characters. Pontiac Motor Division, 1943, CCKW 353. A mechanic leaned closer. Pontiac? As in the car company? They all paused. Until that moment, they had assumed vehicles like this were rare, special American military designs built in dedicated war factories. But this truck, the one sitting in front of them on a muddy French road, had come from a place that once built shiny civilian cars. "How many do you think they've made?" someone asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. They had no answer, not yet. But as they kept uncovering stamped production codes, part numbers, and serial identifiers, they began piecing together a terrifying picture. Every bolt, every bracket, every system had been standardized, manufactured so identically that assembly was practically idiot-proof. This wasn't engineering in the German sense, no artistry, no handcrafted precision. This was engineering for multiplication. One of the younger mechanics did a quick mental calculation. "If this is just one model," he said slowly, "and if civilian plants were converted, they could be building these by the tens of thousands." The supply officer, who had once worked at the Opel factory back in Brandenburg, spoke quietly. "No," he said, staring at the chassis. "If the Americans are using their car factories for trucks, they're not building tens of thousands." He looked up, grim. "They're building hundreds of thousands." That was the moment they understood. This truck wasn't an isolated battlefield capture. It was one brick in a wall that stretched across the Atlantic. Behind this vehicle was not just a factory, but a nation of factories. And Germany had nothing like it. By late afternoon, word of the captured truck had spread, and the division's supply officer arrived to see it for himself. Unlike the frontline soldiers, he didn't look at the GMC as a vehicle. He looked at it as a product, and what he saw disturbed him more than any Allied tank. "We've been thinking about this wrong," he said, running his hand along the steel frame. "You're all looking at this as a truck." "It isn't." The mechanics exchanged puzzled glances. "This," he continued, "is a system, a mobile piece of American industry." He pointed to the chassis. "No complex shaping. Just straight channel steel, easy to produce, easy to weld. Any steelworks could make this next." He examined the cargo bed. "Standard timber. Any sawmill can cut this. No shortages, no delays." Then he tapped on the body panels. "Stamped steel, no curves that aren't necessary, no artistic flourishes, just brute force practicality." Compared to this, their Opel Blitz suddenly seemed like a handmade artifact from another era. The Opel was clever, compact, and finely engineered, but it also required specialized tools, skilled machinists, precision dies, and factories protected from Allied bombs. The American truck, by contrast, could have been built in a barn by a blacksmith. "This is their strength," he said finally. "They don't need to build the best truck. They build the easiest truck to build millions of." The sentence carried the weight of a verdict, and it was now becoming impossible to ignore. American factories were faster, their designs were simpler, their vehicles were replaceable, their production was limitless. This was not genius, it was ruthless logic, and it was winning the war. Over the next several days, the Germans put the captured GMC to work. It didn't sit behind barbed wire as a curiosity, it went straight into service. And instantly everything changed. Where their trusty Opel Blitz truck skidded and floundered in the mud, the GMC clawed forward with its six-wheel drive like a beast built for bad roads. When they overloaded it, as soldiers always do, it didn't complain. Springs didn't snap. The engine didn't whine. It just kept pulling. "It shouldn't take this much weight," one driver said nervously. "Maybe not," replied another, "but it does." Even maintenance was different. On German trucks, every repair felt like surgery. On the GMC, it was like stacking bricks. Remove part, replace part, keep moving. "This thing isn't built," one mechanic finally said. "It's designed to be fixed." On August 25, 1944, as they rumbled east in retreat, they saw something astonishing on a parallel road. An American convoy, no, not a convoy, a river of vehicles, stretching so far into the distance that it seemed endless, truck after truck, all identical, all moving with frightening efficiency. They watched for half an hour before giving up counting. The road shook under the weight of Detroit steel. These weren't combat troops, no tanks, no infantry, just supplies, fuel, ammunition, food, tires, tools, fuel again, more fuel. A young German soldier stared wide-eyed. "Where are their horses?" The older men didn't laugh. They had no answer. They had just witnessed the beginning of something they would later learn had a name. The Red Ball Express, a non-stop highway of American supply trucks feeding an army that never paused, never starved, never ran out. And every third truck was a GMC just like theirs. That day they came to a grim understanding. America wasn't faster because it fought better. America was faster because it never stopped moving. Long after the American convoy disappeared over the horizon, the German mechanics were still silent. The supply officer finally broke it. "Do you understand what we just saw?" He didn't wait for an answer. "We are not fighting the American army," he said quietly. "We're fighting American industry. Most German soldiers had grown up believing they belonged to the most modern and advanced army in the world, an army of tanks, mobile warfare, and blitzkrieg. But the truth was something none of them ever said out loud. 4 out of 5 German supply movements still relied on horses. The Wehrmacht didn't roll across Europe on engines of steel. It limped forward on hooves. Their own division used over 5,000 horses, horses that needed oats and rest, horses that froze in winter, horses that got sick, died, and had to be buried, horses that could haul only a fraction of what a GMC carried in a single trip. Meanwhile, an American division used 0, no hay, no wagons, no veterinary units, no sleep. A single U.S. infantry division fielded 2,000 trucks, almost all of them motorized, standardized, and serviced by an endless chain of spare parts. And there weren't just a few American divisions in France, there were 40. The supply officer did the math in a half-whisper, as if afraid of the result. That's 80,000 trucks. Someone stared at the road where the GMC still sat, engine ticking softly as it cooled. Another man muttered, "We can destroy their tanks. But how do we destroy their roads?" No one answered, because deep down they knew the truth. Germany still fought a 20th century war with a 19th century supply system, and that was a war they could never win. By September 1944, the 276th Infantry Division had captured not 1, but 3 more GMCs, plus a Dodge WC-63 weapons carrier. What began as curiosity turned into a technical investigation. Every spare moment, the mechanics crawled over these vehicles, pulling parts, testing compatibility, and laying pieces out on tarps like battlefield archaeologists. Then they made a discovery that shouldn't have been possible. A carburetor from a GMC fit perfectly onto the Dodge engine. Electrical wiring harnesses swapped between vehicles with no modification. Even the tires, same size, same fittings, no adapters needed. "This can't be right," one of the mechanics said, genuinely confused. "These are from completely different companies." The supply officer shook his head. "No, these aren't different companies. These are different factories building from the same blueprint." It finally clicked. The United States hadn't just built a lot of trucks. They had built a single fleet, one giant machine spread across hundreds of thousands of vehicles. Any driver could operate any truck. Any mechanic could repair any system. Any supply depot could send parts to any front line, and they would fit. No delays. No shortages caused by incompatible parts. No vehicle graveyards waiting on special orders. Meanwhile, German logistics choked on its own complexity. The Wehrmacht fielded trucks from Opel, Büsing, Henschel, MAN, Mercedes, Krupp, Steyr, Stover, all with different designs, unique components, and no interchangeability. A mechanic trained on an Opel Blitz was nearly useless on a Mercedes L3000. Repair depots were nightmares of mismatched parts and handwritten ledgers. American mechanics used one manual per vehicle type. German mechanics lugged binders. Standing over the stripped chassis of a GMC, one of the German corporals summed it up better than any general. "They don't have trucks. They have a system," and standing next to him another finished the thought, "and that's why they're winning." Winter arrived like a sledgehammer. Snow buried France, Belgium, and the Ardennes forest in a silent white death. And with it came Hitler's final gamble, the Ardennes offensive, what the world would later call the Battle of the Bulge. The mechanics of the 276th Infantry Division were ordered east to join the attack. Their convoy was a pitiful sight. A few battered Opel trucks, several horse-drawn wagons, and 4 captured American GMCs leading the column like wolves among tired farm dogs. At first the gamble worked. Fog grounded Allied planes. German armor punched through exhausted American lines. Towns fell. Bridges were seized. Panic spread. But then the offensive slowed. Not because of enemy fire. Not because of Allied reinforcements. Because the tanks ran out of fuel. Columns stalled. Engines coughed and died. Men began siphoning gasoline from abandoned civilian cars. German tanks sat silent on roadsides while infantry units hitched their artillery to horses in 1944. There was no fuel because there were not enough trucks to carry it. Time and again, fuel convoys were delayed, not by combat, but by mud, snow, broken wagons, and blown engines. German logistics officers carried maps with fuel depots circled in red ink, but they might as well have been oceans away. They had no way to reach them in time. Meanwhile, the Americans did something brutally simple. They never stopped moving supplies. Even as German artillery pounded their lines, GMC trucks kept rolling. American supply units worked around the clock, repairing roads, laying temporary bridges, pushing fuel forward no matter the cost. If a truck broke, another replaced it. If a crew died, another took the wheel. For every kilometer German armor gained, its fuel supply shrank by half. The GMC trucks captured by the 276th kept going long after the German vehicles froze or failed. They drove through snow. They hauled loads far beyond their rating. They were beaten, abused, never rested, and they still ran. One German officer put it bluntly: "We did not lose the Ardennes because the Americans were stronger. We lost because they were supplied, and we were not." In a war filled with tanks, artillery, and fighter planes, it was a truck that made the difference. By spring 1945, the war was collapsing around them. The 276th Infantry Division fell back across the Rhine, fighting without fuel, without parts, and often without orders. On April 18, 1945, the division finally surrendered. Ironically, they didn't walk to captivity. They rode there, in the beds of American GMC trucks. Inside the POW camp near Koblenz, life settled into routine. Barbed wire, roll call, cheap soup, mud. But there was also an unexpected announcement one morning. "Any trained mechanics, step forward. The Americans need motor pool workers." The men exchanged glances. They stepped forward. And so the same Germans who once studied the GMC with suspicion were now working on them officially in American service. At first, it felt humiliating, but that feeling didn't last. The work fascinated them. Parts were everywhere, crates stacked higher than a man, labels clearly marked, manuals simple enough for a farm boy to follow. Broken axle, replace it, damaged gearbox, swap it, engine overhaul. 8 hours, maybe less, using only field tools. One day, an American sergeant with oil-stained hands and a cigarette between his teeth asked one of the Germans, "So what did you guys think of our trucks during the war?" The mechanic hesitated, then answered honestly, "We thought they were unsophisticated." The sergeant laughed. "They are, but they work." He flicked ash off his cigarette and added, "You Germans build things to last forever. We build things to win now." That hit harder than any artillery shell. American vehicles weren't built to be perfect. They were built to be available, replaceable, understandable, and most of all, maintainable by ordinary men. Working side by side with the Americans, the German mechanics saw something they had never had during the war, a logistics system that simply did not fail, and they couldn't help but admire it. When the war ended, the German mechanics returned home, not as soldiers, but as survivors. Their towns were rubble, their factories silent, and their country shattered. But everywhere they looked, one thing still moved across the ruined landscape: American trucks. GMCs hauled timber to rebuild bridges. GMCs delivered aid from the Marshall Plan. GMCs became ambulances, construction haulers, lifelines. The same trucks that once supplied invasion now supplied recovery, and the Germans kept repairing them. By 1947, many of those former Wehrmacht mechanics found work in reconstruction depots. Their hands remembered the Opel Blitz, but their minds had been changed by the GMC. When German factories finally reopened, these men carried something with them, knowledge learned not in classrooms, but in defeat.
They brought back two truths. Precision alone does not win wars or build nations. Production does. Good engineering is not what performs best in theory, but what survives reality. German manufacturers adapted. They merged their legendary engineering with American production philosophy. Companies like Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, and BMW rebuilt themselves not as boutique makers of elite machines, but as industrial powerhouses using lessons learned from Detroit's playbook: common parts, modular assembly, build for maintenance, and plan for scale. Years later, one of those mechanics, once a staff sergeant in the 276, was interviewed at an automotive museum. He stood between two restored trucks, an Opel Blitz and a GMC CCKW. He rested his hand on the American truck and said,
"This was not the best truck of the war, but it was the right truck. It did not win because it was strong. It won because there were so many of them. We believed quality would defeat quantity. We were wrong. In war, quantity becomes a quality of its own." The GMC deuce-and-a-half wasn't elegant. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't admired like fighter planes or heavy tanks. But it is remembered by the men who understood war best, the ones who tried to keep armies moving. To them, it was more than a truck. It was a teacher.